Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the UCAN Run Show. I'm Varan, and we are absolutely thrilled to be joined by professional runner Sarah Seller. Sarah, how you doing today?
I'm great. I just finished a morning run, so I'm in a good mood.
That's
Good
how
day.
it goes. That's how it goes. Well, awesome, Sarah. Really appreciative of you joining us. And we really wanted to have you on today to talk about your story, to celebrate Global Running Day, to talk about your story as a runner and kind of the path that your running career has taken really over the last couple of years. But in getting started, how did it all begin for you? If you reflect on some of your early memories of running, where did the interest come from, and what are some things you remember just about those early days when you got out the door and went for a run?
Actually, so that's a really good question for today because I'm home in Utah, so I went on a run this morning. I did part of my run included kind of a section that's where I very first started running. So it was actually really cool this morning I was kind of reflecting on that this morning on my run. So I started running in about sixth grade. My parents would run in the morning before school, and I started joining them on runs. And there's a whole trail system that goes through their backyard, and so we just jump on the trails and do like a trail loop. And I felt like running was like recess. Like it was just um, I don't know. I loved being outside. I loved spending time with family and friends, and I feel like when I run with someone, I get to know them on a different level than I do just having a conversation with them. So yeah, I think this morning as I crested, it's kind of a hilly trail loop. It's on the in the Wasatch Front Mountains in Utah. And as I crested a hill, I got like a panoramic view of Ogden, and it just reminded me like this is why I love running.
That's amazing. And a lot of the early experiences for you with running, it sounds like there was an element of being able to spend time with your family or just release that energy like you talked about, that like, kind of being like recess. What about the competition side of things? When did you start thinking like, hey, this isn't just something for me to release my energy or kind of experience the outdoors, but I actually enjoy trying to be faster than somebody else?
Yeah, I think I am like most runners. I'm kind of type A, and I I like seeing progress. And so, in sixth grade when I worked up to running 5 miles, I remember one of my PE teachers, Holly DeMille. One day I went on a 10-mile run with her, and I just thought I was like the coolest sixth grader that had ever existed because I just ran 10 miles. And I think just kind of that feeling of progressing from like what you couldn't do to having that be very doable. And so I think it was more like the competition side started out more as wanting to see myself progress. And then, it fit right into running track and cross country in middle school and high school. And then I did get pretty, more competitive with um, wanting to be the best of my school or the best, win state championships. And um, it was still much more focused on like me progressing than necessarily like, um, beating specific people, but definitely wanting uh, to win races is always a big motivation.
For sure. And the accessibility of running is something, of course, that lets a lot of kids and even people a lot of times throughout high school participate in the sport and push
Yeah.
themselves in the sport. But then to go and take it to the college level and to do it at college, obviously there's a special level or a special element of desire and motivation that you have to be able to achieve and run at the college level, which you did at Weber State. Take us through that thought process. Like when did it become a thing that it was like, hey, again, this is something that I like the competition, I'm pretty good at, but now I want to even give it that next level of commitment and keep pursuing this.
Yeah, I remember probably as a freshman or sophomore in high school, I uh, kind of set a goal that I would run in college, and it just seemed like the natural progression. I had seen some of my peers go on to run in college, and it just seemed it was pretty cool that you could get a scholarship and have it, running. Sometimes people often, make the comment like, what's the point? Like, why run? Um, Sorry, is that background noise?
You're good.
Okay. Um, and so I think like running has intrinsic value, obviously, but it's cool when it can be tied to something like getting through school, getting a scholarship. Um, and I mean, I feel like I made the closest friendships with my running friends, both in high school and college.
So for you, your college career, you had successes, you also had injuries. Coming out of college, there was a time where you weren't sure, if you would be able to come back to the sport or what level you'd be able to come back to it. What did the time away from running, after pursuing it competitively throughout high school and college, then having to put it on the back burner and have it not be, such a big part of your life? What did that kind of do for you as you reflect on that now?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird now looking back because long periods of time, when you look retrospectively at them, they seem very short. But it was a long period of time when I didn't run, and then even when I got back to running, when I didn't do any workouts, didn't compete, um, and when running was such a huge part of my identity and such a um, key component of kind of just my day-to-day routine, giving that up completely was pretty devastating. But I think it also gave me the opportunity to put it in perspective and realize, like, if I did get back to running, I was going to do everything possible to never put myself in that situation where it would be taken away for years at a time.
So Sarah, we were talking about when you getting back into running after injury, and for everybody that's watching and notices a slight background change, that's just how fast Sarah is. Sometimes you ask her a question and she do a background before she even gets the answer. So, but Sarah, yeah, we were asking, as you got back into running, like what success looked like for you. What were you hoping to achieve, when you came off injury and started running again?
Yeah, so getting back into running was a really slow process, a lot of setbacks. So I took about a year completely off running, and then when I started back into it, as soon as I would get back to running more consistently, like 4 or 5 days a week, I would feel the sharp pain in my foot come back. And so then I'd take weeks off, and it was kind of a cycle of that for many months where I would slowly try to build up, try to do it smart and gradual, and then I'd feel that same pain, and so I'd back off. And um, so, really, my goal getting back into running was to be healthy, and um, it always in the back of my mind was kind of this pull that I wanted to get back to competing, and I always thought marathons would be where I'd have the most success. And so, like, I really wanted to get into marathoning and to get back to competing at a high level, but I honestly didn't know if that would be an option, and I knew I had to be okay with myself if it wasn't an option, and just enjoy running for the lifestyle benefit.
So as we talk about your first marathon, a lot of people who are listening to this and maybe don't know kind of the story of how this professional running got started, they might look at this and say, okay, Sarah Sellers finished second in Boston, 2:36 and change in New York, 2:36 and change in Boston this year. Her first marathon must have been like super planned out and very much like structured, but that wasn't really the case, right? So
Yeah.
how did the marathoning bug start for you?
Uh, so when I finished nurse anesthesia school in Florida, and I moved to Tucson, Arizona, and I was finished with grad school, and I felt like I finally had a little bit more time to dedicate to running and trying to get back. And at that point, I was able to run 5 to 6 days a week, and I felt like I was pretty healthy. So I began putting in just some base miles. I did no hard workouts or anything. And in the late summer, early fall, my brother Ryan called me and said he wanted to run the Boston Marathon the following spring. So I knew I needed to run a marathon to qualify. And it was pretty close to the qualifying window closing. So I signed up for the Huntsville, Utah Marathon, and it was held the last day that you could qualify for Boston. And I literally did zero marathon training. Like I did some like I said, just some base miles. But in terms of marathon specific training, like, tempo runs or hard long runs or any of that, like nothing. So, but I knew the Huntsville race has about over a 4,000-foot drop in elevation. It starts at about 9,000 feet, ends at about 5,000 feet. So I knew, just having been a runner and kind of knowing my paces, that I shouldn't have a problem getting a qualifying time, especially on like a 4,000-foot drop course. And so, yeah, the race it started out and I felt like, I mean, aerobically, like it was just a breeze. Like I was not working hard at all. And probably about mile 10 to 12, I kind of felt like this dull ache starting in my quads. And that dull ache by mile 15, 16 became like pretty intense. Like I could feel that my quads were getting destroyed. And then by like the last 3 miles of the race, I still think that was probably the most painful last 3 miles of any race that I've had, because
Wow.
just from like a physiologic standpoint, I was not prepared for the downhill. I was not prepared for the marathon distance. And it was still a great experience, but I was thoroughly unprepared.
That's, I had a chance to meet your brother in Boston this past year, a few months ago, and talked to him about that race. And yeah, with a smile on his face, he said that you did beat him. So it sounds like you jumped into that one per his encouragement, and then we're able to beat him in that, but also qualify for Boston. So coming out of that, coming out of that race, having qualified for Boston, I'm sure there was a lot of excitement that went with that. But what were you thinking, going into Boston? What was the goal? What was going to be a successful day for you going into that marathon?
Yeah, so going into Boston last year, my A goal, like if I had really a stretch goal, if I had an amazing day, was to run sub 2:37, run the Olympic trials A standard. My B goal was sub 2:45. And I didn't really have a place goal. I kind of, in the back of my mind, was hoping if I had an A goal type day where it was just an incredible day, that I could be top 15, because prize money went through 15th, and I thought it'd be cool to get prize money at Boston.
That's, yep. And as a lot of people know, but maybe some people don't know, that day ended up turning out quite a bit differently for you. So let's talk a little bit about that. It's interesting to hear you say that the marathon in Huntsville, Utah, where you qualified for Boston, was actually some of the toughest marathoning experience, with the downhills of your life, because a lot of us remember, of course, watching the Boston Marathon last year and just the incredible tough weather conditions and the rain and the wind. Take us through that day when you showed up at the start line, or even the days leading up to it, and you knew this is going to be a tough day to run in, most likely. How do you approach that mentally?
Yeah, so I kind of threw my initial goals out the window. Like I knew that I was not in shape to run a sub 2:37 in those type of headwinds and conditions. So initially, it was a little bit disheartening, because I'd put in some hard training and lots of early mornings and felt like I sacrificed a lot to run a time goal. And so when the time goal wasn't an option, I kind of had to just get over that disappointment and set new goals. And my goal became much less defined. Like I didn't really have, I still thought, hopefully I could get the B standard, but it wasn't really so much a time goal as it was running a smart tactical race. I knew like I didn't want to be by myself if I didn't have to be in the race, and I wanted to work with the other women, like not be in no man's land, not be leading for a long stretch. If I was going to be in a group, I wanted to be trading leads and working together, not just getting destroyed by the conditions. And I was super nervous waking up in the morning. I remember I was just, I just like most marathoners, I hardly slept the night before, and woke up kind of shaking and jittery. And then by the time I got to the start line and had talked to a lot of the other women and kind of made friendships and felt like we were in it together. Um, I was completely calm by the time I got to the start line, and yeah, it was a pretty cool experience.
Some of the pictures, that we've seen of you those days, like the determination and probably the mental drive that it had to take to get through that weather and those conditions. Like you can see it on your face. I mean, it looks like you're grinding and you're driving. In those moments, and obviously that's probably a true statement you could say for most marathons because it's always going to get tough. But
Mm.
for you in that moment, or even in any moments you've had when it's gotten particularly tough, do you have anything specific that you'll actually do, like whether it's something you're saying to yourself in your head, or just any type of mental tactic to help yourself get through those really, really hard moments in the marathon?
Yeah, I think a few things. Like a lot of marathoners, I try to think of positive mantras. Just telling myself like I'm strong, like I can do this. This is what I've trained for. And then also, I think acknowledging like that I knew there would be hard times in the race, and that these are the hard times. And I think when I acknowledge that, like I think of it as like the demons are going to come, and like I know they're going to come, and when they come, like you're ready for it. And it almost like lessens some of the difficulty when you acknowledge like, oh, this is the really hard part that I knew would come. Like, and it's okay, like, and I'm doing it.
That's, yeah, I think that's something like, people hear about mental tricks all the time, and it's interesting to hear people at your level, like what are the things you actually say to yourself, what are some of the specific phrases and words like you were just describing that you actually use, and actually say. So you get to the finish line, and I know it was a bit of a surprise for you, right? Like you weren't initially sure, or maybe it was a little bit even hard to believe that you had finished second at the 2018 Boston Marathon. What were those moments immediately in crossing the finish like for you as you're trying to make sense of your day, and then even once you found out what happened, trying to make sense of your accomplishment?
Yeah, I mean, just shock and disbelief, like, and also, I mean, kind of a small amount of fear and foreboding because as much as it was 99% totally thrilling and exciting and, something I'd never expected, it was 1% like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. Like, I trained hard, I wanted to do well, but I knew it would bring a lot of attention and a lot of interest. And so I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. I knew that there was a wave coming.
Yeah, and you really lived that wave over the last now about 14 months, and we'll talk a little bit here in a moment about your second trip back to Boston, where you just competed a few months ago, back in April, coming back a year after finishing second. But to kind of touch on what you just talked about, as you sit here, now having kind of gone through perhaps the craziest elements of the storm and what was coming your way, what you kind of in that moment knew was coming your way, how's it changed things for you? Like as you sit in there today, has it in any way impacted your love of the sport of running? Has it made you approach running differently? Yeah, kind of maybe just some general thoughts about what's changed over the last 14 or 15 months.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think um, initially in the first few weeks after Boston, it was kind of this adrenaline high where um, I was back working my normal hours and uh, getting back into training, and also juggling like interviews and coordinating sponsorships and things that I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating very much, and so I think I burned myself out without intending to over the first few months after Boston. And I started into some summer races and felt like I had some really disappointing performances, and that was really hard to handle because it's like, well, now there's all this attention and I wanted to do well. Um, and yeah, running became kind of a stress inducer as opposed to more of a stress reliever. And I kind of had to take a step back and realize, like, if I can be a stress case for my whole life if I want to be, and this is what it's going to feel like. But if I want to enjoy life and enjoy running, then I need to learn to like have this on my own timeline, manage my own expectations, and just enjoy the process and realize like I don't owe anyone, I don't owe myself. And that sounds weird to say, but I think just being grateful for the incredible opportunity that I'd been given without feeling like I owed the world another second place Boston type finish. Because as much as I would love for that to happen, I don't know if that's in the cards. And we'll see. I'll train for it, but who knows?
Yeah, I think, and that's a, I'm sure that's a, like you pointed to, when you've got all the attention and the expectations, and then and just coming back to races and still trying to like, figure out where you are at yourself. I can understand how that could be just a lot to handle. And I think what you said about, kind of the running being stress inducing versus, stress relieving is kind of an interesting element of, kind of some of the pressures that people doing this competitively can face. Like we all in our day-to-day lives for the most part are looking at running as what we do outside of work to help you forget about the
Yeah.
stresses of work. So that's a really interesting perspective. You said something else really fascinating when we were in Boston, Sarah, and you were talking about a lot of people looking kind of to you and your story as inspiring, and you were kind of trying to wrap your mind around that because you were saying, I think something along the lines of like, I don't necessarily view myself as an inspiring person. But your story, certainly there's so many elements, and I think a lot of people do draw inspiration from your story. How have you sort of wrapped your mind around that? And have you over time gotten to enjoy people coming up to you and telling you that you're an inspiration to them?
Yeah, and that's another. I think that whole scenario of having people say that I was an inspiration, that was incredibly stressful to me because, and I should feel very grateful, and I do, but I also, um, I feel like if someone says I'm an inspiration, like I have an extremely high bar to live up to, and it just becomes a very like kind of a self-defeating stressful cycle. And so I kind of had to separate myself from the story and like realize like I'm a person that makes mistakes and that struggles and doesn't do things perfectly, and that's okay. And that simultaneously what happened at Boston, like being able to train for Boston pretty much by myself in early mornings, and that's something that a lot of people can relate to. And so um, I didn't want to kind of hide my story or suppress it as much as it was sometimes stressful to do so, because I felt like it was a really cool gift and a cool opportunity that I had been given, and that um, it was something that people could benefit from and people could relate to, even though I don't feel like the greatest like inspiration for people to look to, because I'm, in all honesty, I'm not. Like there's a lot of, you can look at, cancer survivors that have gone on to form foundations and serve thousands of people. Like that to me is inspiring. Like, and on a small level, like my story is inspiring, and it's really cool. But me as a person, I think I've got a long ways to go.
Well, it's that's an interesting insight into like how you like you probably like everyone is always evaluating themselves, but maybe sometimes athletes like are evaluating themselves a little bit harsher because it's so competitive, So yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective. I'd say from where I sit, like there were many people that really found what you had to say to really connect with them, So it's great that like I totally get where you're coming from, and I think it's also like you just so eloquently said, there's just elements of your story and like what you were able to achieve and kind of how you've conducted yourself since achieving that people are drawn to for sure. And I think even if we look at your experience in Boston this year, so kind of coming back with all those expectations and, you know, like you kind of detailed, like still working a job and training around that. How did you feel about how everything went in Boston? I mean, you were able to run, a time that was very similar to what you ran in New York. I think it was very close to your PR, right? Maybe just
Mm-hmm.
slightly off your PR, but
5 seconds
super
off.
close. Yeah, like 5 seconds off your PR. So you're right there.
Yeah.
Like sitting here now, a couple months after that. how can you reflect on how Boston went for you? Are you happy with how things went?
Yeah, I think as far as like what I wanted time wise going into Boston this year, I was pretty far off. I feel like I was in shape to run faster than that. Of course, it doesn't really matter. You can say that, and it matters what you perform and what you do. But kind of like or saying that that the demons are going to come and it's going to get hard, and I knew that that would be compounded this year because um, external pressure I think affects everybody, even when you pretend it doesn't. That's why NBA basketball players can shoot however many perfect free throws on their own, and then when they're in a game in front of thousands of people, their shooting record goes down. Like, and that's what they do professionally. And so I knew that like I was going to do everything I could to minimize the pressure that I put on the race and to enjoy the experience, but also realize that the pressure was going to be a factor and to just try to roll with it. So that being said, I'm overall happy with how it went. Again, it was pretty far off what I thought I could run, and that's always a little bit frustrating. But in the grand scheme of things, I just put in over a year of consistent marathon training and didn't have any stress fractures, no major injuries. I feel like I have been able to come back from Boston this year, and it was kind of a rough recovery, but still no big injuries. So in the big picture, like that is what's a success to me. And I think faster times will hopefully come, and it's I think having the humility to realize like as much as I train to have a great race and to PR every time, that's not going to happen every time, and you just kind of have to move forward.
And I really think like hearing you say that, right? Like that what you're describing is what most people go through when they race. It's you have a goal in mind and you're not going to get that every time. But if you can reflect on and I'm sure for you, like you put so much into it and there was so much attention on it. Like I'm sure it's you can have the perspective that you have once you're not like in the midst of it, right? Like once you give yourself some space to come out of it. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
bigger picture, like being able to put together long blocks of training, being healthy, and being able to bounce back and do it again and continue doing it again, especially if it's something you enjoy doing. I mean, that's what most people want to get out of running. That's like the dream for most of us as we sit here is like, let me have a good experience, let me be healthy, and let me enjoy it enough to come back and do it again. And it sounds like for you, that's a place where you're in.
Exactly.
Maybe just piggybacking off of that, like how long do you let yourself kind of beat yourself up or have a little pity party if you haven't loved the outcome of the race before you get to the point that you can really reflect on it in the bigger picture sense? How do you kind of go through that after a race?
Yeah, for sure. I think especially in the immediate time after the race, like the first few hours after, I try to just let myself feel whatever I'm going to feel. And like this time, it was a lot of frustration. Like I was, in terms of like my performance, I was initially extremely, pretty frustrated and disappointed in myself. Um, and I think not suppressing that initially allows you to um, kind of take the time, like you said, have a pity party, and then get over it. And um, actually, I talked to Abdirahman, who also lives in, or he has a home in Tucson. He's sometimes in Tucson, and he ran Boston this year, and I saw him after the race, and he asked how it went, and I said I was pretty disappointed, and he's like, bad races happen. Don't even think about it. Just move on. And the way he said it was just, he's a four-time Olympian. Like the way he said that he tries not to spend any energy, waste any energy on bad races. Um, coming from a runner who's much more accomplished than me, like it it made me really put stock in what he was saying and realize like, yeah, you can give yourself a couple hours to have a pity party and then get over yourself, get over the situation, and move forward. And that's that's how you bounce back and have long-term success, is by not spending that energy dwelling on when things are a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great perspective from somebody like Abdi. You probably think of people like him or Meb or Shalane or Desi who've had so much success over the years. Like they've
Yeah.
probably had so many races that they're really bummed about. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think for anybody that's going to keep doing this for many years and keep achieving at a high level, it seems like you have to let yourself, like you talked about, feel what you're feeling so you don't totally forget it. But then it seems like you got to put it aside pretty quickly. And it's great that you were able to get that perspective from somebody with so much experience.
Yeah.
Um, Sarah, just a couple more for you before we wrap this up for the day. So for you now, just from a marathon standpoint, I just want to ask you a couple things about fueling. Obviously, as you've
Yeah.
got now are kind of a consistent marathoner in your running career right now and trying to do this over and over, the nutrition side of things is paramount, and kind of figuring out that piece of the puzzle, both in training and racing, is really important. How did UCAN kind of enter the marathon training picture for you? How was it put on your radar, and why was it something that you felt like you wanted to incorporate into your marathon training?
Yeah, so I started using UCAN intermittently around the time that I ran the Huntsville Marathon. My friend and teammate Taylor Ward, who's a great marathoner, she has been using UCAN for years, and so um, saw she'd had great success with it. So I started using it, and I loved the product. So then when Boston happened last year, and when I had opportunities to reach out, and I knew I wanted to have like a consistent fuel that I was using for races, and I had great success with UCAN. So that's kind of how I got connected with UCAN. Was I really believed in the concept of the product, and then I had good success using it myself. And then since then, it's just been very consistent. I feel like I've never had um, any major GI issues. And one thing that I love about UCAN is that I had, I'm by no means anti-sugar. Like I have dessert frequently. I love dark chocolate, and but I didn't like the concept that a lot of marathon fueling seemed to be entirely based on simple sugars. And, you know, again, simple sugar is not the end of the world, but I didn't like that being the basis for, pre-fueling and during fueling, and even a lot of post-recovery. So I loved that UCAN was I'd had problems with some complex carbohydrates because a lot of fiber often, can cause some GI issues, and UCAN was not a simple sugar, but in terms of the way it acted for me, it was similar to a simple sugar, where I didn't have any problems like I did with fiber, but I also didn't feel like I was, just having my entire marathon nutrition based on simple sugars.
Yeah, totally. And that's I think that's something that a lot of runners, like you were talking about, like it's not to say that there's never a place or time where you want to consume sugar, but it's like if I'm training at a high volume, like do I want to be fueling with this kind of consistently, on a daily basis through all my workouts? There's two kind of components of how you utilize UCAN that I think would be interesting to people here in the audience that I just wanted to ask you about. So one of the things you were talking about, Sarah, with UCAN, like the uniqueness of it is the superstarch, which is the carbohydrate in UCAN, which, as you described, is not a simple sugar, but is not going to sit heavy in your stomach like a lot of other complex carbs or fibers. So it's kind of that best of both worlds. You're getting the quick digestion, but you're also getting the long lasting energy, not the quick flashes of energy. Now, for you, you mentioned a few times that you're still working. You're a nurse anesthetist. You're going to the hospital, and a lot of the times you're trying to fit training, around work, like a lot of people here in the audience are doing. And some of that training is early in the morning. How is UCAN kind of come into play for you on those days where you have to do your training super, super early in the morning, but you still want to get fueled?
Yeah, so a lot of times I'll wake up and try to be out the door in 15 minutes from when I wake up on my run. And So I'll just have like a serving of UCAN before I go run, and um, I feel like it replenishes that glycogen that's been depleted overnight. But I can have it like 5 minutes before I run, and it doesn't sit heavy or cause any issues. And then I use it frequently at the hospital. Actually, yesterday I was in a 11-hour craniectomy long case, and
That's
I
a
knew
true,
it was
that's a true marathon right there. My
I
goodness.
know. And before the case, I had had breakfast after my run, but right before I went into the case, like I had a UCAN bar because I didn't know if or when someone would get me out to get lunch, and I was glad that I did because I got lunch at like 3 p.m. And so, um, yeah, I feel like UCAN just like tides me over for a lot longer time, and yeah,
Yeah,
kind of
that was kind of the
keeps
second thing I was
steady.
going to ask you about, which you mentioned is just using it throughout your long workday. So I just want to give people a little sneak peek at what Sarah's talking about. So the carbohydrate, the super starch in UCAN, it's both in the UCAN bar, which is what Sarah was mentioning, eating at work to get her through some of those long days. It's also in the UCAN powder. So the powder is more what Sarah would use in the morning prior to big workouts. So, but they're both based around the same idea of that stabilizing, long lasting energy without the simple sugars. Sarah, thanks a lot. It's always really interesting to kind of hear different athletes based on their own schedules and kind of their own like nuances of when they train, talk about how they use UCAN. Because while the general application is the same, everybody kind of has their little fine tweaks to it depending on their own individual training and how it's set up. Um, One final thing I wanted to just ask you before we sign off today is just your motivation around running. We've talked a lot about, how you got started in the sport, kind of your journey and how different elements of the sport have changed for you as time has gone on, especially with everything that's happened to you over the last, year and a half. When you wake up on a day like today, you talked about going out for your morning run. What motivates you to get out the door and put one foot in front of the other? Why do you keep doing it?
Yeah, sometimes some days are a lot harder than others. Most days, like today, it was like it's a beautiful day here in Utah. I get to run on the trails. Like there's few things I'd rather do than go for a trail run in 60 degrees in Utah. So there's some days when it literally takes like no motivation. It's just like eating ice cream. Like it's pretty fun to do. um, then there's other days when you didn't get to bed early enough and it's early and dark and you're sore from the workout the day before, and when you get out of bed, like your ankles are creaking and you just like nothing about you wants to go run. But um, I think on those days, it's just having the routine in place and realizing like even when the run itself is not fun, because there's definitely runs where you don't feel good the whole time, but you never regret going. Except for the times when you're truly like worsening an injury, and it's not smart to run. The vast majority of the time, like good days, bad days, like you're always glad you did it. And I think I don't necessarily feel like that runner's high very often, but I think I feel a runner's low when I don't run. Like on when I'm injured and I'm just cross training. Um, for me, like I don't get that same. I don't know. I guess it is a runner's high, but I only notice it when it's gone. And yeah, so that kind of
That,
keeps me going.
that's funny you term it that way because it's almost similar to how we describe UCAN to people. You're not going to feel that sugar high, but if you use it consistently, you're going to feel it when you don't use it. And for you, it's like running. It's like you just do it so consistently that maybe day to day you're not feeling like that necessary high, but when you don't do it, it's like, oh, okay, now I get what the balance it kind of adds to my day every day. So yeah, that's interesting. I think especially for somebody who's doing it so frequently and so consistently, it's almost just like that's just what you do. That's just what your
Yeah.
day is, right? Get up and fit in a run at some point during the day. Well, Sarah, this has been great. We really appreciated you sharing your story with us. Really excited to see what's ahead for you both this year as well as going into the Olympic trials next year in 2020. I know that's another big event and something that's probably on your mind. But for anybody that just wants to pay attention to what's coming up with you the second half of the year and what you're up to, what's the best way for folks to follow you and pay attention to your career?
Probably my Instagram, just Sarah_Sellers. I'm also on Twitter. I don't tweet as often as I'm on Instagram. So, yeah, and it's Sarah Who Sellers on Twitter.
Awesome. That's Sarah_Sellers on Instagram, Sarah Who Sellers on Twitter. Sarah, thanks so much. We'll look forward to this, and or sorry, this was really fun. We'll look forward to doing this again.
All right, thanks so much, Ryan.